Hello everyone, welcome to the Sweeney Show, Business Law Podcast. I'm David Sweeney, and joining me here today is Tom Coughlan, solicitor and immigration expert. Tom, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Dave.
Special day for you today, Tom. I believe it's your birthday.
It is, Dave.
Happy birthday.
Yeah. I reached the halfway point, which keeps moving. 45 today. Was
Wow.
at the halfway point when I was 40 as well. But
Okay.
when you meet me when I'm 50, I'll be still at the halfway point. But we're getting there slowly but surely, year by year.
Very good. And so how long you qualified as solicitor now?
As a solicitor,
Yeah.
2000, which
2000.
is 20 years February gone.
Wow. And what was your pathway into that? Where did you kind of go to college and school and your legal training? Where did all that come about? Because I know you have an interesting story. You did a lot of work in America post-qualification, didn't you?
That's right. I'm originally from Waterford, and we're all Coughlans down there. We're all Coughlans up in Mitchelstown, where my dad is from, where the name originated. My mother's a Cunningham from West Waterford, and some dance hall along the border in Youghal or someplace brought romance together between the two counties. So when it comes to hurling, when it comes to romance, Cork and Waterford came up trumps on that occasion. So I went to school locally, and then I went to Ring College for 2 years. I gained a great love of Irish there. I started school very young, so I did 2 years in Ring. They have a 7th class there, which is very good if you're young. My own son started school this year at the age of 5, and I was still technically off the roll for the first few weeks in school because I was actually 3. And that was to do with teacher numbers, and we were encouraged, 2 of us, to start school early. So I went to the local primary school, Ring, and then up to Rossgrey to the monks, the Sturtian monks, for 5 years. And my teacher in Ring, her son had gone there, her sons, and the monastery in Melleray is very close to my home, Capquin, and the Cistercians would have had a positive shadow down from the mountain to Capquin. So I spent 5 years in Rossgrey, and from there I was the only person in my year of 60 to come to Cork. Cork was always our draw. Cork would be the city for Capquin. We're halfway between Cork and Waterford, and Cork was kind of our city. So in '93, I started BCL and UCC. Like people at the moment, I had to come up to Cork to get the Cork examiner to see the CAO results. But I got my choice of law in Cork, and I was very happy, and I came to Cork. So it was a new start in Cork because I was the only one from my class, but that probably wasn't a bad thing. So through UCC, BCL, and then I went off in the J1 in the summer of '95. My cousin in America organised a job for me, and I really got a great placement. I got an internship in St. Clair's Hospital on the west side of Manhattan, which was a 250-bed acute care hospital, mainly servicing infectious disease victims, and had gained a place in medical history in the 80s when it became the first designated AIDS centre on the East Coast of America. We had about 4,000 outpatient AIDS patients when I was there. We had a lockdown psychiatric unit, lockdown federal AIDS prisoner unit, a large methadone treatment program for drug addicts, and AIDS was at the centre of what we did. So that was hugely interesting for me. I worked in the legal office. They had 2 in-house lawyers, one of whom was vice president for clinical operations. So I was also involved in developing new programs, developing new off-site clinics. We had a specialty in AIDS dentistry. We were really the heart and soul of AIDS care in the 90s. So I get a certain throwback to what's going on at the moment with infectious diseases, but it's very different. But at the same time, it's an intense environment, but for me it was a huge experience.
Yeah, New York in the mid-90s must have been an eye-opener from a young lad from Capquin, was it?
I was 19 when I first went out there. And I arrived on my own into the legal office, and I remember being asked by my boss at the time a little bit of my history, and he said, sure, look, we'll put you to work and see what you can do. And then the first thing he asked me to do was make a cup of coffee. So I'd been warned before I went there, don't end up making coffee and photocopying for the summer. So I went into the kitchenette and I put hot water from the tap into instant coffee. And I went out to the boss and I gave it to him and he spat it out in the
You weren't
desk.
asked again?
And I said, I don't drink coffee, I just don't know how to make it. So then he asked me to research the law on a mechanic's lien, because there was something had come up about the hospital, and a lien was against the hospital regarding a debt. So I went off and researched the whole thing, and then I came back to him with a memo of research and my conclusions and what we should do. And he phoned up an external lawyer, because they use external people for quirky things, who gave him the exact same advice as I gave him. And he turned around to me and he said, "You could be useful." So I didn't make coffee for the summer. I was doing useful things, and summer 95 came and went. The place was doing great. And they said, "Come back." So summer 96, I came back, finished the BCL, and organised another J1, and signed up for the LLB in UCC, because I was planning maybe on going back to America long term after that, and I wasn't quite sure what I would do, and there was a time frame involved. So second summer in St. Clair's, I remember leaving some kind of unimportant work behind me. I think it was like keeping the library up to date or something, and I arrived back the following June, having left the previous October, and the pile was still there waiting for me. But the second summer, AIDS became treatable. Our census dropped dramatically. There were some problems internally in the business. We were part of Catholic Healthcare Network. There were other hospitals who had other programs which rivaled us in other areas. And when the AIDS census fell, we kind of had to look for something else to do. So that was, a difficult summer in terms of work, but again, great experience, a lot of changes, a lot of program changes. And then they still like me, I still like them. They said, "Well, you come back again, and come back maybe on a more long-term basis." So when I finished UCC, I organised a 9-month J1 with great help from Professor David Morgan, who signed me up, and through an agency in America who sponsors students. I ended up renewing that for another 9 months and stayed for 18 months. And because of the Irish law degree, I could do the New York State Bar. And the hospital supported me in that. And in 13th of July 1998, I qualified as the then youngest lawyer in America, as I could ascertain it. And the second youngest lawyer in the history of the state of New York at the time, second to Roy Cohen, Donald Trump's first personal lawyer. And third now, as I can understand it, Gary Kilba, a chap that went to UCC after me, got admitted to New York Bar, and I met him at a party one time, and he informed me that he was younger than me. So I'm now the third youngest, as I can ascertain it, in the history of New York. So that was a bit of a thrill.
Where do you think your love of the law and education, where does that come from? Is that something instilled you at home, or is that something just natural? Do you have an instinct for it? Or
I think home instilled me with a huge work ethic. My mother ran a shop all her life until last year, which was a family business. It was 3 generations, and in fact under my office there's a shop, and I'm the owner of the shop, so I'm a shopkeeper still. I'm 4th generation shopkeeping. And I think when you're meeting the public, and when you're serving customers, and when you're stocking shelves, and when you're up and down to the cash and carry in Cork at the weekends and eating half the sweets on the way home, I just think work is part of your life.
Yeah. My
dad has a farm, but he worked for Dairy Gold as well for 37 years. That work could be seasonal, and it was very intense at times. So we grew up in a working house, and the business was part of home. So work was always part of my life. And, maybe looking at my life now, I don't think I want to work as hard as my parents. But I feel like I do. And that's a balance that's hard to get. Education, I think in primary school I was too young. I felt maybe that I wasn't academically capable because I was so young, and that second year in Ring sorted me out. And then, in a boarding environment, it comes with positives and negatives. So one of the positives is that your days are very structured, and, extracurricular activities like sports and debating, they're important. And I was on the debating team in school, and we won an All-Ireland final in 95 in the Gaeling Irish debating, which was a big part of my life at time in school. And that kind of gave me, I always loved the stage. I always loved to say my piece. I was never shy. And I think law married into that very nicely. So law, I've been asked this question before, and my answer is usually that I just watch too much television. I grew up with Matlock, and he did it. And the person would stand up and admit everything, and he seemed to get everybody off as well, which is quite a talent. But Yeah. So traveling to New York maybe gave me a greater taste of bright lights, big city.
Yeah.
The reality of coming back into practice.
Yeah.
Well, this practice is so varied now. You can
Yeah.
do so much. I mean, there's a lot of choice in it.
And
But
when you came back then, what was your pathway into Blackhall or into your actual qualifications as a solicitor?
yeah, so what was happening was actually I ended up riding two horses. I had the law degree from Cork, and at the time, the Northern Ireland students from Queen's took a case called Bloomer versus the Law Society to challenge the exemption system for law graduates in the Republic, and succeeded in that. And the Law Society then took exemptions off of students. So I was one of the key people involved, along with a few other students from UCC, in the case of Abramson versus the Law Society, where 299 students in the system sued the Law Society for stripping us of our exemptions mid-flight. And Mr. Justice Brian McCracken in the High Court agreed with us that we were exceptional, and the Law Society reconsidered their position and granted us all an exceptional exemption. So I had FE1 exemption, which the current FE1 candidates maybe might find bizarre at this stage, but 20 years ago, if you had a law degree, you were exempted, and that was hard fought for people in the system. So I had an apprenticeship lined up in Cork with Robert Flynn in what is now Murphy English, was Flynn English at the time. And Robert offered me an apprenticeship, and we're friends to this day. In fact, I met him this morning on the school run, and he invited me to lunch, so we're still great friends. And I arranged to come back from New York. With my New York qualification, I was entitled to sit the Qualified Foreign Lawyers Transfer Test. And with my law degree and my apprenticeship, I was entitled to do the regular stream in Cork. So I decided to do both. So I left my job in St. Clair's on a career break. The position was temporarily filled by somebody who was known to me. And then I came back to Blackhall Place, took my professional exams, and came down to Cork to do what was to be 6 months of an apprenticeship before arranging a 6-month placement back in New York. And if it didn't work out, I'd come back and finish here. And if it did work out, I'd qualify through the transfer. But I came back to Cork, did the time in the office, and then kind of life took over. I was home. I was in a relationship. Life was comfortable. My old school pals and college pals, rather, were all around. I hit the boom. I got offered a job in Daily Durham Solicitors, now Daily Durham Donnelly, the day I qualified. And I took the Foreign Qualified Lawyers Transfer Test, passed it. So I ended up qualifying early after only 9 months in an office, and got a job. And then I had to choose between going back or staying. And I ended up, the person who had replaced me was happy to stay on. And I felt New York was kind of part of my past rather than my future. And I felt it was all here in Ireland. And there was a lot going on here in 2000. There's a lot of good stuff here.
And how long did you work in private practice then before you set up on your own?
So I was doing mainly criminal defence and plaintiff litigation work for 5 years.
So were you on your feet every day in court?
Yes. My very first court appearance actually was my boss was kind of waiting for me to start, and he headed away for a weekend abroad and said, "Okay, if anything happens, you take care of it." And I got a call from a Garda station that the biggest drugs bust in Cork had just taken place. And it was my first week in the job, and I had never done a criminal case before. And I went down to a special sitting in Cork District Court. So my boss, Donald Daly, talked me through it on the phone, in fairness. And I was kind of ready to go, but based on, some directions from my boss. So I arrived down to the courthouse next door, and TV3 and RT were there in front of me and trailed me all the way in. And that was my first court appearance ever. So outside the back of the courthouse, there was a man smoking a cigarette, milling around, waiting like me, and it happened to be the judge. So Judge Ginger McGroark, and his son Peter went to college with me. So I tried to use that as an introduction to who I was, and said, "Nice to meet you," and told him it was my first day on the job. And he smiled and said, "It'll be okay." So I arrived in, and in fairness, he sat down and he said,
"Into the lion's den."
"Oh yeah," but I couldn't have had I couldn't
Yeah.
have had a better mentor.
Yeah.
The judge walked me through the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know, suggested to me I might apply for legal aid, suggested that my client might apply for bail, suggested I might wait while the Gardaí told me their objections to bail, suggested I might take my instructions, suggested that I might go through the details of the objections and deal with them. And then, having granted the legal aid and politely refused bail, which devastated me at this stage, it was built up to a great victory, politely reminded me that the appeal for bail in the district court is to the High Court and not the Circuit Court, and reminded me of the advice that I was about to give my client regarding the appeal he was about to file with the High Court, which he did. And if memory serves, I think he was released on High Court bail. And that was my first day.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I think that probably also teaches you that, like, the legal fraternity community is actually quite collegiate, isn't it?
Very. And Cork is. And I know one of the questions you often ask guests here is in terms of, you know, advice for younger people and people starting out. And there are many things you could say, but one of them, and this was instilled in me by my apprentice master and by my boss, is just your colleagues will be with you forever. You know, clients will come and go, transactions will happen, but your colleagues are always there, and you have one reputation and you have to guard it jealously. And you have to be a good colleague to have good colleagues. So mind your colleagues and they'll mind you.
Yeah.
And here in Cork in particular, we're extremely lucky. People outside might describe it as cliquey, and there's truth in that. But it's very, very collegial. And that is one of the best things about practicing definitely in Cork and to a large extent in Ireland. But, you know, there are pockets of competition within the law, which makes certain areas of practice and certain places far more competitive than others. And sometimes that competition can lead to a lack of collegiality, which can be both unfortunate, you know, and disappointing.
That kind of leads me to my next question, where running a business, because you obviously have an entrepreneurial spirit and a very strong work ethic. Do you ever fight between Tom the lawyer and Tom the businessman?
So I opened up my own practice here in 2005. So I was 5 years as an employed solicitor, and I started in Tuckey Street, and 2 years in I outgrew it and moved down here to Anglesey Street. And the building was, you know, a key city centre location, opened a shop on the ground floor and opened the legal practice here. And we're 4 solicitors now. We've 1 in-house barrister and I think 13 staff in total. So, you know, it's a lot of people. Well, you know, it's a lot of people for me. So Tom the lawyer, Tom the businessman. Yeah, I suppose it's hard to be good at both. I find that people often thought that my American experience maybe gave me a certain almost brashness, and I hate to compare myself to Jimmy McGill and Better Call Saul, but when the series first came out, people kept on saying, that's you, it's sort of representing the underclass and the underprivileged and, you know, illegal migrants and legal migrants and, you know, the criminal fraternity. And, you know, I had a big Golden Pages ad when I first opened up, and advertising was something I engaged with. And I suppose at the start of my career, I felt I could do so much and more and more and more. So the lawyer, Tom, you got to provide a quality product. I'm finding in the law as well, you got to specialize more and more. And I am totally disinclined now to do anything that I don't know. I feel at the age of 45 that I'm not so open to learning new skills, but I'm certainly open to learning new things and new skills within my area of practice. And I think now you have to specialize in the law. And Tom the businessman was very ambitious when he started in 2005. Tom the family man arrived, and Tom the businessman had to pull back then. And Tom the lawyer has always been there because, you know, my clients, my constituency of clients are at the heart and soul of my business, my ability to provide for myself and my family, to get satisfaction out of my day, to do a good job and to get paid. So Tom the lawyer continues to try and provide a good product, great product if possible. Tom the businessman has had to be happy with third base now and Tom the family man is becoming a more important Tom every day. Now, Tom the individual, I don't know where he's gone. he's waiting to come back.
I think when you start to have kids, the individual kind of goes for a few years, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, there's a great joy in it. This morning I woke up and my kids had hidden 3 birthday presents for me. We opened one of them, which strangely will be very much enjoyed by my 5-year-old son. Another one, a Harry Potter chess set, which is fantastic. Another one sounded like Lego, actually, which I love making with the kids. And the third one looks like it comes from a menswear shop, but we'll have to see this evening what delight is in there.
And your practice is like, you have a full general practice, offer a full legal service, but your reputation is known for immigration law and providing really strong immigration advice. How did you specialise in that? How did that come about?
Yeah, I got 4 J1 visas in America to keep myself there. So it started with me keeping myself in America. And then I was looking at going back at H1B visas or specialty ORL visas. The visas have letters in America based on the Immigration Act there, and their subsection J1 is actually section J1 of the Act. So that got me interested. And then when I came to Ireland, some American people kind of asked me who had ancestry in Ireland about getting Irish passports. And I helped a couple of people organise Irish passports through the foreign birth registration. And funnily enough, the first person who came to me to assist with that, actually wanted to get an Irish passport so that his son could play basketball in Italy. So then I began to see as well there was a mobility in it, and then the European Union is a big part of it. And then people came to me with immigration queries. There was no immigration guidance, no immigration book. The INIS, the Irish Naturalisation Immigration Service, hadn't been formed. We're back in 2000 here. I think that was formed in 2003. And immigration was very discretionary to the Minister for Justice. But the idea of people coming to Ireland was a new phenomenon. Like, people coming to stay here was, the economy was just taking off. So we'd only become a destination country very recently. The boom only hit in the late 90s. So by 2000, when I started, it was a new phenomenon. So when people came to me, I began to just take an interest in this area. And then I remember dealing with one of my first clients who was refused a visa for a family member to come to Ireland. She was living here with her children. He was refused a visa. I did the visa appeal. It succeeded. And then when he arrived here, he came in to see me, and her children wanted to meet this man that brought daddy to see them. And then he came, honoured his visa and left, and all of that family are Irish citizens now. And that was one of my first cases, and I kind of just liked what I did.
So you just mentioned there at the start that the minister had a lot of discretion in allowing visas and permits. That obviously must have meant there was a lot of appeals and maybe judicial reviews. Is that still the same now?
Yeah, I think my own history of taking judicial reviews probably came a bit later. As the thing developed and as the numbers increased, then the numbers of refusals grew. I resisted getting involved in international protection for a long time, but I ended up taking a case which went to the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg and established some important legal principles regarding processing of subsidiary protection applications, which is a European version of asylum, but a subsidiary to asylum. And kind of 2005, 6, 7, judicial review became a large part of my practice. It kind of fell away after that. A lot of it was down to change in judicial manpower in the courts. The economy was going south fast, and the judges appointed to the list took the view that the country kind of couldn't afford it. So human rights are very popular when things are good. Human rights are not so important when things are bad. But it's kind of gained a resurgence again in more recent times. The judge taking the immigration asylum list has a huge impact on the outcomes. It's an area where people tend to have strong opinions. It's not like a commercial transaction. And migration is coming into sharper focus again at the moment with what's going on with the pandemic.
Do you think that legal decision then is politically driven?
I think it's politically affected. I think the judges, the Supreme Court issued a significant decision yesterday in a case called Gorry, and I was reading the judgment last night, and the judges were very conscious of the effect it could have to, as they would describe, open floodgates. And there's always this push-pull. And effectively, the Minister for Justice is the gatekeeper. So when should the Minister open the gate? When should the Minister close the gate? And I often say to decision makers that their job is much tougher than mine. I mean, I take a position, I advocate for my client, I do my absolute best, but I don't make the decisions. Sometimes I have to remind my clients as well, particularly if they're not happy with a particular outcome, that I don't make the decision. But if you're not happy with a particular outcome, there are other avenues. And very often a client will come into me with their version of the facts, but they may be alternative facts. If they actually take away those alternative facts and get back to the facts, very often they will have good grounds to stay in this country that they have dismissed themselves because it's not cute enough, or it's not contorted enough. And very often the best answers in life are simple answers. So I find clients often have a lot of options that they don't realize themselves. They may have underlying rights that they don't even understand themselves. And very often clients tend to embellish the truth, and that's what really drives the decision makers crazy. And once you lose your credibility, and come back to credibility and reputation, once you lose your reputation and credibility. So very often when I'm doing an immigration case, the first thing I'll do is say, my client lied about this, and this. And the reaction, particularly if you're in an oral appeal, is like, okay, but here's my good point. And here's the other point that I don't think is bad. But here's the pathway by which you should let my client enter this country or stay in this country. And once you play your worst card first, your case can only really get better from there. Yeah. And I often find just the truth will set you free. And very often in the immigration world, if you can just cut through all the lies because they've heard it all before and they don't want to hear it again, and get down to the nub of your case. And sometimes the nub of your case will be, look, I've just been here a long time. I haven't done anything very bad. You know, here's my own personal situation. And I've had a lot of approvals that could go either way, where the decision maker ultimately decides that this person is actually okay. And sometimes people find themselves in a situation where they're illegally in Ireland, which, you know, it just kind of happened, or something went wrong. And if you can express that rather than lying or trying to make up something, and if you can just tell your human story, you know, people within the department, and I end up engaging with them regularly, the Department of Justice, you know, they're good people too, who come to work like us every day, and, you know, who'd like to feel good sometimes as well about doing the right thing. But if in doubt, and particularly if they find a lie, they say, well, look, you're just a liar, and you're not the type of person I want in my country. And I go along with that to a large extent. But if you can engage with that person, and if you can get them to see beyond the lies, you know, you will often then also take the position that they deserve a second chance once they come clean with you. So.
What are you seeing on the ground with regards Brexit? I know, like, obviously Brexit was a huge thing up to the start of the year of COVID. It's starting to come back around again with movement in the UK. What's the effect that Brexit is having on Ireland and immigration at the moment?
At this very moment, not a whole pile, but when Brexit was first mooted, when it first looked like it was going to happen, there was a significant flow of people over the border from Northern Ireland. You had a surge in applications then for international protection, asylum, subsidiary protection, because that was kind of the first port of call, and for some people, the only thing they could think of. It would get them a PPS number, it would get them somewhere to stay. You know, direct provision might do them for a while. A lot of people made a strategic decision then to apply for asylum, so there would be a certain amount of abuse there. I wouldn't discount applications for asylum as all being abusive by a long stretch. An awful lot of people that I've encountered who came here otherwise or lawfully, they may have at the heart of their claim the ability to seek asylum as well. And I'm thinking in particular, I've represented a lot of Chinese people who have more than 2 children. And in China, you're facing compulsory abortion or sterilization if they get pregnant again, and their unauthorized child is not permitted to go to mainstream school, mainstream education. I mean, that's tremendous persecution. So there's a lot of Chinese people, for example, who have more than the permitted number of children. And if they are forced to repatriate home, what they face, if you had to face it, if I told you you cannot have another child, and if I told you if your wife gets pregnant, then she has to have an abortion, and you don't have a choice in it. I mean, Ireland has such a torrid history with abortion. I just don't, it's not a topic I want to get into, but it's an example, though, of people living their lives every day that you don't see as refugees. But you're going back then to a situation where what's acceptable in one country and the treatment of homosexuals in countries like Iran or Bangladesh or Pakistan. I mean, you have people living their lives here whom you may not even know what their sexuality is, but if they are repatriated home to their home country, and I've dealt with a number of cases where this arises, where you may have women from Islamic fundamentalist or Muslim countries who would be obliged to marry and obliged to engage in a full marital relationship. And, you know, if you actually logically think that through, what is that? And I mean, the outcome of that in Ireland is a criminal offence. So there's so many strands and layers to this. Very often, the reason why you may have a right to stay here may not be the reason that you're imagining. People's lives are immensely complicated. And in the backgrounds of those lives, depending on the countries that they come from, they may or may not be acceptable people. And that's what kind of maybe interests me in a lot of the international protection work I've done, those types of issues, and they keep on expanding. And I find them very, very interesting.
So it seems that, because I know you have a volume of immigration clients, and it's months now for anyone to get an appointment to see you, but that you look at the individual and the human story behind each one.
Yes. And I decided a number of years ago to treat every client the same.
You know, it's not a copy and paste, or this law will suit you, will get you in this avenue. You're kind of taking each one as it sits down in front of you very subjectively.
And you can copy and paste their circumstance sometimes, because you know, sometimes when you have a route that you can follow, the map to that destination remains the same, but how you get there can vary or change. But I learned years ago that if you treat everybody the same, you will achieve the best outcomes. And I find as well, sometimes clients come into me and they'll say, well, I'll pay you anything you want. And you could take a load of money off somebody and fail them maybe. You also create an expectation that's unrealistic or unfair. You should charge everybody the same. You should charge people for what you do. A good friend of mine told me years ago, you know, where sometimes people will come to you who just can't afford. And then you need to make a decision. If it's a pro bono case, it's a pro bono case, and you're going to take it. And you're not going to raise a fee for what you do, and you proceed on that basis. But I'll tell you one story about one of the first cases where that happened to me. A guy came in to me, and his wife was due to be transferred, which is a version of deported to another European country. And I said, look, I don't represent people for free. I'll charge you €50. So he paid the €50, and we got 3 sets of high court costs out of the whole battle. She was transferred out of the country for a few hours, as it happens, but due to divine intervention, because of one of the judicial reviews, that transfer became ineffective. And when she arrived in her destination, they turned her around and sent her back to Ireland because the legal basis on which she was being transferred had expired. And today she's a citizen, he's a citizen. They're now friends of mine. And I made 3 sets of high court costs out of agreeing to take on a case for €50, no matter where it went.
Yeah, so I think Tom the businessman there kind of at the end won over Tom the lawyer, was it?
Tom the businessman gets rewarded if Tom the lawyer can do his job. And Tom the lawyer, if you enjoy what you do, the rewards will follow. And in the law, particularly if you represent vulnerable people, a lot of those vulnerable people are being poorly treated in our various systems. And that's not intentional. Sometimes the squeaky wheel gets the grease and you have to assert yourself. And a lot of vulnerable people don't have the ability to assert themselves. So we're doing a lot of disability cases at the moment for autistic children. We're doing a lot of immigration cases for very vulnerable people. And people have to pull their own weight, because I have a big staff here who have their own houses to run. People should contribute as much as they can. But very often in the immigration cases I take, I will often suggest a fee to a client that may be, you know, on the high side, and I see what their reaction is. And sometimes those people will say to me, well, look, I just don't have that kind of money, but, you know, could I pay you this much now? And once they demonstrate a willingness to pay and tell you what the problem is up front, then I'm interested now. Come on, sit down, tell me about your case. Yeah. We'll worry about the money later, because the money will follow. And if they say to you, well, money's no problem, well, then you have a problem, because you can be sure of one thing: money will be a problem. And very often people who say money is no problem, they're spending money on other stuff. So, you know, we're not a social service or a charity, but we do a lot of socially important things, and we provide a lot of charitable sentiment and service. but we are a commercial law firm. And if you try and balance those things, and if you are charitable, and if you are socially aware and socially responsible, then you will be a successful commercial enterprise as well.
And just from your business, the practice itself, that you traded through a recession previously in the 2010, 11 era, 9, and now we're into the COVID. Did you learn lessons from that period that you can bring in now, or how is business now with the COVID? Are you finding the interruptions affecting business?
Yeah, I was on a major upward trajectory in 2008, and I invested a huge amount of money purchasing a commercial building here. And that's when judicial review and immigration collapsed, and the state was in trouble. And in fact, at one stage, we had succeeded in a number of cases where I was owed costs, and the state delayed in paying those costs, even when they were taxed and defined, for upwards of 9 months. And I remember actually the state owed me more money than anybody else, and the state was the biggest defaulter I had. So I had to do a certain amount of cutting back, and that was frightening. But, in 2010 was probably my worst year, and I wondered whether I'd make it.
In what way? Why do you say that?
Financially, I'd done work for a property developer who's at a low level, but it was still a 6-figure sum, which was never recovered. Core area, a lot of clients were in financial trouble. A lot of immigration clients were no longer working. Some people left the country and left me with unpaid bills. So the squeeze was on, and you had all of the boom time costs and none of the boom time income. Yeah. So I just worked, Dave. I just worked. And my own lifestyle is very modest. Yeah. And I was on a pathway to a more elaborate lifestyle. I was on the pathway where I was doing a lot more personal spending, and it forced me to curtail that. Yeah. And I learned from that as well, to create a financial buffer and hold your financial buffer and prepare yourself for the next shock and hit. And in this business, we have a 2 to 3 year pay cycle very often for the best of our work, and people don't understand that. In the shop I have, if I buy a Mars bar today, I get paid for a Mars bar today. In the legal business, the best work I'm doing, I may be paid for in 2 years' time. Mm-hmm. So in relation to this pandemic, I will say I'm running a fairly tight operation. I'd like to think I'm a fair employer, and I'd like to think that people are, getting fair remuneration for what they're doing. But in this particular pandemic, and definitely we have an awful lot of income that's deferred because we've cases adjourned, business isn't getting done. We've had business interruption. The biggest interrupter of this business for me internally has been actually childcare. I think 6 of our 13 staff have young children, so they need to balance out their parental responsibilities. And I was attuned to that because I have 2 small kids. And then a lot of the people we were dealing with had disruption, and a lot of cases were adjourned, and a lot of hearings haven't taken place. So I consider a lot of that work to be deferred rather than eliminated. Yeah. And some clients came to me and asked me, could they defer payment plans that I had with them for fees, and I agreed to them all. And on the other side, I had to look at my own cash flow and balance that as well. And while I've taken, a drop in income for sure in terms of fee income this year, I'm casting my view into next year and the following year, because the seeds I'm sowing this year, that's the harvest next year. And a lot of the money that we would have collected in the earlier part of this year was really debt collection from last year. But there was a period there from March to July where everything kind of stopped. And that gap is going to be in all of our businesses. And things are reopening now, and how we do business has changed now. But I found a lot of silver linings in this dreadful dark cloud that's covered our world. I'm having remote consultations with most of my clients. There's now remote login to courts. I had a full Court of Appeal hearing on a forum such as this. Instead of printing 10,000 pages of materials, it was scanned into a Dropbox. The environment was saved and spared 10,000. Everybody was online like this. It was highly satisfactory. I've had a International Protection Office refugee interview on a pilot basis in February before this really kicked in. And that person was granted refugee status. It was a 4.5-hour interview like this, but it was highly satisfactory. And I didn't have to go up at 5 a.m. and travel to Dublin I could go up for the morning to the venue in Cork where the remote hearing was held, dealing with somebody in Dublin, have lunch in town and go back to work for the evening. It's fantastic.
How?
So Chief Justice Frank Clark has said that we've developed 5 years and 5 months in terms of technology. Couldn't agree more, at least 5 years.
And there's huge buy-in from all parties as well.
But you asked me about Brexit. There was a big pull over the border, mainly from the Middle Eastern countries such as Pakistan and Bangladesh. Something else that has happened, I've noticed, is that a lot of good people who, well, all people are good people, but a lot of people who would be highly qualified people who would be very attractive for us, for our economy, have chosen to come to Ireland to work over the UK because of Brexit. So I've seen myself making applications for employment permits and critical skills permits and fielding queries regarding business permissions from people who may be attractive either on an investment or on a qualification basis for this country. So I think we're attracting a lot of good people that we might like to have here. Take the pandemic out of it, over the UK, because internationally people don't want to go to the UK and do business with this experiment that they've decided to do by unscrambling the eggs of the last 40 years.
Yeah, people want certainty. Just one question there. Back to kind of like the 11, 12, 13 era of your business, like I'm sure there's a lot of stress and worry there. How did you cope with that physically and mentally? And like, was there lessons learned from that you can apply now? Did your health suffer?
Yes. I tended and still tend to kind of catch colds and flus. And I got pleurisy about 15 years ago and my left lung collapsed and it caused me some ongoing, and that's why with the COVID as well, I'm kind of careful. I don't want to overstate it, that, your health is fragile. You're invincible until you're not well. And if you're not well, you can go downhill very quickly. And I suffered a health setback about 5 years ago again, which kind of made me recalibrate and think about life again a bit. But during that period of time, I found the mountains of Ireland and I started hill walking with the Southern Law Association Hill Walking Group. And the Southern Law Association also ran a 10K run for the Heart Foundation. And I was doing running, road running, in anticipation of that, and continued to do the marathon in a relay for a few years afterwards. And until the children arrived, you'd find me out in the mountain most weeks with the SLA group and another group of barristers and solicitors and legal staff and non-legal people who were part of that group. And I found actually that going up the Knockmadowns or the Cumbers and the Galties, going down to Kerry, Purple Mountain, climbed Cron Tools many times, and I found that a tremendous physical outlet. So I think building exercise into your day and getting that headspace, I think the headspace you get in exercise is useful. Sometimes you do a bit of thinking and straighten things out, but very often you zone out, and I think that's very helpful. And I certainly found that discovering the Irish Hills definitely improved things for me. And you'd often come down after a hill walk on a Sunday and the SLA group would go out on a Tuesday and you'd arrive into work the next day and you're kind of ready to go when you've figured out in your head what you're going to do. And once you actually make a decision, it doesn't necessarily have to be the best decision. It's just the decision. I often say that there's about 5 ways to do things. There's the best way. And then there's kind of 2 other ways that are pretty good. And there's another way that'll probably get you there. And then it's just the wrong way. So, 3 to 4 out of 5 ain't bad.
Yeah.
Make a decision.
Tom, you're obviously an ambitious man. What are the plans for Tom Coughlan, solicitor, businessman, family man for the future?
Maybe for those 3 men to become one man. For one person to be able to live those 3 lives. There are only 24 hours in the day, and how do you spend them? I think I've come to value time.
Yeah.
I've learned that time is the most valuable thing I have. Money, we all have our financial demands, and once I have enough money to buy you coffee after this, I'm happy. Money has never been a huge driver for me, but money is very important to me for stability. It's the most important thing I see in money is stability. I also like to be able to do the things that are important to me, but happily the things that are important to me are quite cheap. You know, when we travel, my wife is Polish and we often go to Poland and we have family there, so our trips are quite cheap. And we have I have a sister-in-law in Spain, and we travel and we meet her and we stay close by. And, you know, the things that we do are not hugely expensive. So our lifestyles, you know, are well taken care of. The things that we enjoy and the things that we like are not hugely expensive. So money is important to me for stability, and I need financial stability for everything, for my business, for my practice, and for my home. So that is very important to me. Tom, the businessman, hasn't got great ambitions to do more. I've had a case in the European Court of Justice. I've had a number of cases in the Supreme Court. I've been through all the courts in the land. I get to find one for Strasbourg when I'm working on it. I'd like to maybe, run a case in every court and tribunal in my jurisdiction. That's something, and in Ireland I think I've hit them all, but Strasbourg is on the bucket list. I was admitted to the US Supreme Court back in 2007. Mr. Justice John Roberts, who swore in Presidents Obama and Trump. I have something in common with them. He swore me in 2007, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who passed away last week, the full bench was there. So that was a bit of a thrill in 2007. It's something you can do after 3 years of qualification. And I've qualified in New York since 98, and I've maintained my practicing cert there. And I'm affiliated to a firm in New York, James O'Malley and Associates, 299 Broadway, and they do into America immigration work. And I do into Ireland immigration work, and we collaborate sometimes. And that's a nice association. So to answer your question, eventually, I think I want the three men that you wonder what they'll do to fuse into one man who can do all three things with some balance and enjoy them.
Yeah. Tom, thank you so much for your time. It's been a fascinating and interesting conversation. My last question is, because I know you have two young sons, would you be happy for your two sons to join you in the business, and is that something you'd recommend for them to do? Is that something you would like?
I would like them to be happy. And my 3-year-old is obsessed with policemen, and I'm convinced he's going to become a policeman. So I'm not going to dissuade him from that. He also loves firemen, and I think they're two noble callings. My eldest boy thinks like me, and he might be on the other side of the line from his brother someday. One trying to put him away and one trying to keep him out. But I made my own path in life, and I've often said in terms of apprentices as well, that our trainees, that it's good maybe to go and do something else. And then it's often good to come back to where you started. But gaining different experiences in life is important. So I suppose, actually, Dave, no. I would like my sons to do what they want to do in life. And this is what I've chosen to do in my life. And if this and what I do, and when the time comes, who knows what I'll be doing or where I'll be, but if what I've done is in any way a foundation for them or is in any way useful to them, then I'm there for them. But when I first went to America, my cousin got me a job in St. Clair's Hospital. And my cousin is in his 80s now, and I'm glad to say he's still doing well. And he picked me up from the airport from Columbia University, where I was on the J1 staying, and drove me down to the hospital. And he said, I'm your cousin, I'm your mother's first cousin. I know, how's your granny? My granddad was his uncle. And he said, look, you wrote to me a nice letter, and no emails back then. And he said, I am after securing this position to you. And let me just tell you something now. Here's your chance. Legal internship, minimum wage, hospital in Manhattan, but they'll put you up with somewhere to stay. If it works out, I'll be happy for you. And if it doesn't work out, you've only one person to blame, and that's yourself. So he said, I'll buy you lunch. I'll even take you for a drink. I wasn't 21, but hey, but I don't want to hear about it if it doesn't work out. I'm giving you a chance and nothing more. And I took that chance. And for my own kids, I'd like to say in the future to take your chances. People will give you chances. And for young people who are wondering what's going to happen next, particularly in the great uncertainty of this environment, life is full of chances. Life is full of opportunity. And this pandemic is creating opportunity as well as taking opportunity. So you've just got to be open to the possibilities. So when you get a chance, well, then take your chance and make use of that chance. And if it's working for you, roll with it. And if it's not working for you, well, then be mature enough to say, okay, this is an experience. It teaches me some of what I don't want. And, change your gaze and move on to the next thing.
Tom, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here as our guest. I know I've been asking you for about 2 years now, so I was shocked when you actually agreed to come on. Thank you so much again, and go enjoy your birthday. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.